The morning sun rose gently over Red Hollow, casting long golden rays across the rolling hills and dusty cattle trails. For years, the valley had been known as a place where hard-working ranchers built honest lives with determination and sacrifice. Among them lived a 55-year-old widow who had spent nearly 30 years beside her husband transforming a patch of rugged land into one of the finest ranches in the county. Together they had repaired broken fences, raised healthy cattle, survived harsh winters, and earned the respect of everyone around them. Their home was simple, yet filled with warmth, kindness, and the satisfaction that comes from honest labor and unwavering dedication every single day. Only a week earlier, tragedy shattered that peaceful life without warning. Her husband became seriously ill and passed away before anyone could save him, leaving the widow completely alone with painful memories and an uncertain future. She barely had enough time to arrange his burial before grief was interrupted by loud pounding on her front door. Standing outside was Barnaby Thorne, the richest and most feared landowner in the county. Instead of offering sympathy or comfort, he entered her home carrying several official-looking papers and demanded immediate payment of an enormous debt he claimed her late husband had borrowed during the previous winter. The widow stood frozen as Thorne spread the documents across her kitchen table. According to the papers, the debt had already reached its deadline, and unless every coin was paid within 3 days, the ranch, house, livestock, and every possession she owned would legally belong to him. She immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Her husband had always refused to borrow money, believing that living honestly without debt was the only path to true independence. Looking carefully at the signature, she noticed the handwriting was rough, hurried, and completely different from her husband's careful writing. Deep inside, she realized the papers had been forged. Although fear settled heavily upon her heart, she refused to surrender without a fight. Early the following morning, she saddled her horse and rode into Red Hollow, hoping justice still existed somewhere within the town. Her first destination was the local bank, where she respectfully explained everything to the nervous banker. She pointed at the suspicious signature and begged him to compare it with official records. Instead of investigating, the banker avoided eye contact, slid the papers back across the counter, and quietly insisted that the debt had already been recognized as legal, leaving him unwilling to challenge Barnaby Thorne's authority. Determined not to give up, the widow visited neighbors whose families had once survived difficult times because of her husband's generosity. He had loaned livestock, repaired fences without charge, and shared food whenever drought or illness struck nearby ranches. She hoped those friendships would now be returned. Instead, each visit ended with another heartbreaking disappointment. Doors opened only slightly before frightened voices apologized through narrow cracks. Every family admitted they feared Thorne's revenge because he controlled mortgages, grazing rights, and nearly every important business throughout the valley. Helping her meant risking everything they owned, and none possessed the courage to stand against him. Still refusing to surrender, she rode directly to the sheriff's office, carrying the forged papers tightly in her hands. She believed the law would surely recognize obvious fraud and arrest the man responsible. The sheriff barely glanced at the documents before tossing them carelessly into the dirt beside his chair. Calmly sharpening his pocket knife, he declared that Barnaby Thorne was a respected citizen whose business dealings were beyond question. He warned her to stop causing trouble, pay the supposed debt, and leave his office immediately. At that painful moment, she understood the law served wealth instead of justice. As Thursday evening arrived, hope slowly disappeared. She attempted to sell several healthy cattle to neighboring ranchers, but every potential buyer turned away after receiving threats from Thorne's men. The powerful land baron had already warned the entire county that anyone doing business with her would face severe consequences. She returned home exhausted, knowing every possible escape had been blocked before she even began searching for one. Sitting alone on her porch beneath the fading sunset, she realized she was trapped inside a system carefully designed to protect corruption while crushing honest people who dared to resist. Before sunrise on Friday, the The peaceful silence surrounding her ranch was shattered by pounding hooves and splintering wood. Two armed enforcers kicked open her front door without permission, dragged her outside despite her desperate protests, and tied her wrists tightly behind her back with rough rope. Ignoring every plea, they forced her onto a horse and began riding toward Red Hollow, determined to make a public example of the respected widow. As frightened townspeople watched from behind closed windows and silent porches, she realized the day ahead would test not only her courage, but also the conscience of everyone living within the valley. The frightened widow was dragged into the center of Red Hollow, while dozens of townspeople watched from their porches in complete silence. Barnaby Thorne stood proudly beside the hitching post with a cruel smile spreading across his face. He wanted every man, woman, and child to witness what happened to anyone who questioned his authority. His deputy tied the widow tightly against the wooden post before stepping back with a heavy leather whip in his hand. The street became so quiet that even the restless horses stopped moving, as everyone waited for the punishment to begin beneath the blazing afternoon sun. Without mercy, the deputy swung the whip through the air. The sharp crack echoed across the empty street before the leather struck the widow's back with terrible force. She cried out in pain and collapsed into the thick dust, struggling to breathe. Barnaby Thorne remained completely emotionless, ordering the deputy to strike again until everyone understood who controlled Red Hollow. Fear kept every witness frozen in place. Even the sheriff and preacher refused to interfere. It seemed as though justice itself had abandoned the town, leaving only cruelty and silence to rule over innocent people. Just as the deputy lifted the whip again, a calm voice broke through the heavy silence. The stranger's words were simple but powerful. He declared that the widow owed nothing and warned that anyone who struck her again would answer to him. Every head turned toward the edge of town, where a lone rider sat motionless upon a tired horse. Dust covered his long black coat, while the brim of his weathered hat shaded his face. One hand rested near the polished handle of his revolver, and his fearless eyes never left the deputy or Barnaby Thorne. The deputy angrily ordered the stranger to leave, claiming the punishment was official business. Instead of retreating, the rider calmly guided his horse into the center of the street until he stopped only a few feet away from Thorne. The wealthy land baron demanded to know his name and threatened to shoot him if he refused to leave immediately. Slowly pushing back his hat, the stranger revealed sharp, determined eyes hardened by years of hardship. In a quiet voice, he introduced himself as Jace and calmly declared he had spent enough years watching bullies steal from honest families through lies. Before anyone could react, Jace stepped down from his horse with surprising speed. Pulling a small pocket knife from his coat, he cut through the ropes binding the widow's wrists. She stumbled forward, barely able to stand after the beating she had endured. Jace instructed the bartender watching nearby to take her inside the saloon, give her fresh water, and keep her safe from further harm. Barnaby Thorne exploded with rage, shouting for his armed enforcers to kill the stranger immediately before he destroyed the fear that had kept the entire town under his control for years. 4 armed enforcers rushed toward their weapons, but Jace moved faster than anyone expected. Before the first gunman could fully draw his revolver, a deafening gunshot echoed across the valley. Jace's revolver was already smoking as the first attacker dropped his weapon and collapsed clutching his wounded shoulder. The remaining men froze in complete shock. They realized they were facing someone whose speed and skill far exceeded their own. Jace calmly aimed his revolver directly at Barnaby Thorne and ordered every enforcer to drop their weapons, leaving them trembling with fear and uncertainty. With the street completely silent once again, Jace reached into his coat and removed the forged debt papers. Holding them high for everyone to see, he explained that Barnaby Thorne had spent years stealing ranches by forging signatures and using corrupt officials to make fake debts appear legal. He reminded several families how they had lost their own homes under similar circumstances. As whispers spread through the watching crowd, people slowly realized they had allowed fear to blind them. Even the sheriff began quietly backing away, hoping to escape before the truth completely destroyed his alliance with Thorne. The widow emerged from the saloon despite her injuries, standing proudly beside the stranger who had risked everything to protect her. Inspired by Jace's courage, the townspeople finally stepped forward together instead of hiding behind closed doors. Farmers carried heavy tools while others seized the frightened sheriff before he could escape. Barnaby Thorne was tied with the same rope once used against the widow, while his forged documents were thrown into a burning barrel and reduced to ashes. As evening settled over Red Hollow, justice returned at last, and Jace quietly rode away, leaving behind a town forever changed by one fearless act. The people of Red Hollow stood together in the middle of the dusty street, watching the flames consume every forged debt paper Barnaby Thorne had used to steal land from honest families. For the first time in many years, no one lowered their eyes in fear when the wealthy land baron shouted threats. His power had disappeared the moment the truth was exposed before the entire town. The same neighbors who had once hidden behind locked doors now stepped forward with courage, realizing their silence had allowed injustice to grow stronger with every passing season until someone finally challenged it. Several ranchers searched through the sheriff's office, while others gathered every document connected to Thorne's dishonest business. Hidden inside dusty filing cabinets, they discovered contracts carrying forged signatures, false property claims, and records proving that many hardworking families had been cheated out of their homes. The evidence shocked everyone. Even those who had trusted the sheriff could no longer deny the corruption surrounding their community. The preacher, deeply ashamed for remaining silent, admitted before the crowd that fear had clouded his judgment and promised never again to ignore wrongdoing committed against innocent people seeking fairness. Maeve watched quietly as neighbors returned belongings taken from families over the years. Some offered livestock, while others brought tools, fencing supplies, and food to help rebuild damaged ranches. Men who had once avoided her now apologized sincerely for abandoning her when she needed them most. Although her body still ached from the cruel whipping, she accepted their apologies with dignity instead of bitterness. She reminded everyone that true strength was not found in revenge, but in standing together whenever injustice threatened another innocent person, no matter how powerful the wrongdoer appeared to be. Barnaby Thorne remained tied securely near the hitching post, unable to intimidate anyone with his wealth or angry words. The sheriff sat beside him in heavy iron handcuffs, staring silently at the dusty ground. Both men understood their influence had completely disappeared. Messengers were sent to the county seat requesting honest lawmen to investigate every accusation and take custody of the prisoners. Unlike before, no one attempted to interfere or hide evidence. Every witness willingly came forward, determined to tell the complete truth about years of fraud, intimidation, and stolen property throughout the valley. As the afternoon slowly turned into evening, Maeve returned to her ranch with several volunteers riding beside her. Broken gates were repaired, frightened cattle gathered safely back into their pastures, and damaged fences quickly rebuilt. The empty house that had felt so lonely after her husband's death slowly filled with neighbors carrying fresh bread, blankets, tools, and supplies. Although nothing could erase her loss, their kindness reminded her she was no longer facing the future alone. The community that fear had once divided was finally beginning to heal through honesty, cooperation, and renewed trust in one another. Meanwhile, Jace quietly prepared to leave without expecting praise or reward. He cleaned his revolver, checked his saddle, and gently patted his tired horse before fastening his weathered coat. The grateful townspeople gathered near the edge of town, hoping to convince him to stay longer. Children looked at him with admiration, while older ranchers thanked him for restoring justice when everyone else had been too frightened to act. Jace simply smiled, explaining that every town deserved people brave enough to protect one another because lasting peace could never depend upon a single wandering stranger. Maeve approached Jace before he mounted his horse and thanked him for saving not only her life, but the spirit of Red Hollow itself. She admitted she had almost lost hope after every door closed against her and every trusted official refused to help. Jace reminded her that courage often begins with one person refusing to accept injustice. Eventually, others find the strength to stand beside them. He tipped his hat respectfully, wished her peace for the years ahead, and encouraged the townspeople never again to surrender their voices to fear, greed, or corruption. As dawn approached the following morning, Jace disappeared along the quiet frontier trail while the rising sun bathed Red Hollow in warm light. Behind him remained a community forever changed by the lesson his actions had taught. The ranches once threatened by corruption were safe again. Honest families reclaimed their dignity, and neighbors looked after one another with renewed determination. Maeve stood proudly on her porch, watching the peaceful valley stretch toward the distant hills. Though the mysterious Gunslinger rode into history without seeking recognition, his courage became a legend remembered by generations throughout the frontier.